Lauren Greenberg was speaking in her personal capacity and not for her firm. Welcome to FO Podcasts. With me is Lauren Greenberg. Today she's a lawyer, a rather eminent lawyer. She works for White Case, where I worked briefly once. But today we are not talking about legal matters. We are not discussing constitutional matters. Today we are discussing the law. So I stand corrected. But we are going to discuss the law as it pertains to sports, as it pertains to women's sports. And Lauren, before we dive into the discussion about Title IX of the 1972 Education Amendment Act, tell us your story. How did you get into sport? What was the sport you played? Where did you play the sport? And of course, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Atul, for welcoming me and allowing me to tell my story and our story about how the women's varsity softball team at Dartmouth was founded. I played sports at a young age, and my sports of choice were softball, soccer,
which we call football.
Football in most of the world,
in the old world, and even the new world, except the US.
Exactly.
And
not
Canada.
Football.
And Canada.
Right. And ski. I love to ski, downhill skiing.
So you are pretty sporty. I mean, two are dynamic, very dynamic sports, and one is a hand-eye coordination sport.
Well, I would say several are hand-eye coordination.
No, one is foot-eye
coordination.
Unless you play
soccer, hand-eye, foot coordination, softball. Yes.
All of them have that coordination bit. So
absolutely,
yeah.
And but where I think I and several of my pioneering women colleagues and other students where we had an impact on women's sports was at Dartmouth when we started. I matriculated in 1989, and at that time I met my cohort in crime, Erica Beisler, and the two of us wanted to play softball, and there was no established team at the school. And so Erica set up a meeting for anyone interested in wanting to play softball, which is where I met her. And so freshman year, we set out to play softball and try to get a team established that the school would help support so that we could play and demonstrate that we had not only the competitive abilities, but that there was sustained interest and a league for us to play in. And so what transpired over the 4 years that we were students of the school was an effort to play in the Ivy League amongst our competitor schools with a team that was sponsored and funded and supported by the school. And that effort proved very challenging given that the school did not have at the time much interest in supporting us. And so we put up roadblocks to our ability to succeed and establish the sport. We, on our own, contacted the other schools in the area, in Hanover, New Hampshire, and so in surrounding areas of Vermont and New Hampshire to play softball competitive games, and we contacted all the athletic directors at the Ivy League schools so that we could play in our league, even though we were not a sanctioned sport by Dartmouth. And the Ivy League graciously let us play, but every game had to be an away game. So we did a lot of traveling, and we had no funds to do that. So I and another classmate took the test to drive the school bus, and we would go to all these away games. We were not very good. We didn't have a coach. We didn't have a way to really organize us. We were both coaches and players and fundraisers. But over the years, we continued to have interest. We continued to push our interest and seek support from the school, and ultimately ended up having to file a Title IX complaint. So Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, we filed a complaint with the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. We chose that path because we could not find a lawyer to represent us pro bono. we had done a lot of research and learned that there were other women's sports, particularly Colgate women's hockey, that had filed a lawsuit against the school for discrimination in athletics and had a lawyer representing them. And it took a very long time. We were following the case, and we learned about things like standing and jurisdiction, or things that we really didn't know much about. And so we did not feel sufficiently educated to file a suit in our own names or pro se. So we learned about Title IX. It was a good tool to use for us because the school received millions of dollars in federal funding and therefore had to comply with Title IX. And we were able to file a complaint with the Office of the Department of Education. And if they agreed with our complaint, then they would do all of the work instead of us not knowing how to do anything with the law. They would communicate with Dartmouth and know the procedures and what was necessary and what the school needed to do to comply with the law in ways that we as students wouldn't know. And they had the resource to do it, and we demonstrated a larger harm, not just to ourselves and the current population or membership of the softball team, but we put the complaint in the name of the women's softball team generally. So any new members over the years who played on the team would be brought into the complaint, and therefore there was a continuing harm until it was resolved.
Very interesting. So in a way, you were destined to be a lawyer thanks to your interest in sport.
For sure, that is why I decided to become a lawyer. Was filing that complaint and doing all the legwork on that was very interesting to me. There was a problem that needed to be solved. There were laws to help solve it, and I liked that analytical and persuasive process.
So let us talk about the law. Let's talk about the Education Amendment. From the sounds of it, this 1972 amendment legislation changed a lot. And so tell us, from your viewpoint, what did it change for you? And over the years, how have things changed? And to do so, please give us the context beforehand, because very quickly, those who are listening should realize and should know that in the Anglo-Saxon world, sport for men was part of the education. Sport, in fact, if you watch Jeremy Paxman's Empire, a 5-part series on Empire, one entire episode is on sport. And sport in British public schools was to create muscular Christians, the idea of muscular Christianity, who would go out and then civilize brownie fuzzy fuzzies like me, and it would toughen them up, train them to be leaders, train them in teamwork, build their character, and sport through the British school system then spread to the colonies. And in fact, all across Europe, sport for men was part of character building, particularly in the past for aristocracy, because it was, in a way, some sort of, just as you have pre-nursery, you have pre-military training, and it was pre-military training in some ways. So for men in Dartmouth, sport was very well established. There was rowing, there was American football, there was baseball, there was tennis. Dartmouth is in the middle of nowhere. It is a beautiful part of the world, and it is an outdoorsy school. So clearly sport wasn't new to Dartmouth. It wasn't like a geeky Indian school where everyone collapses if you make them run 100 or 400 meters. It was in the Anglo-Saxon tradition. So now that I've given some context, you give us the American context. What was it like pre-1972? What was the education impact all about? And what has been its impact?
Right. So this is a very important question. And it wasn't just for women. Prior to the 60s, women, people of color in the United States, they were discriminated against. Obviously, that's well known. But even in educational opportunities and in the environment, there were stereotypes about what women should be doing, what sports they could be playing, what they shouldn't be doing. Even just being admitted to college took a long time for women to be admitted to colleges in the U.S. And so there was a series
all over
of
the world,
laws
all over the world.
It's
It's not just the US.
right.
I think the US people think it's just the US, but I mean, it took a long time for women to be admitted to Oxford and Cambridge. My alma mater is one of them, and the same is true for women getting their vote. So
I was going to say the same. The vote, and some jurisdictions, the women are even still are not allowed to drive. For example, I mean, there's still opportunities.
Saudi Arabia has been a pioneer in the Middle East. You can drive, isn't that great?
There were several laws throughout the years in the U.S. that helped try to prohibit discrimination based on sex, race, and other inherent qualities. And so the Civil Rights Act, for example, prohibited racial discrimination. The Education Amendment of 1970, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 prohibited sex discrimination in educational institutions and activities that receive federal funding. And the Voting Rights Act in the U.S. permitted women to vote. So there have been different tools over the years to help try to allow opportunities for women and people of color that didn't previously exist, and pave the way for them to excel or succeed and excel and have in these opportunities. So the Title IX is used for all sorts of cases that there appears to be discrimination. So it's in educational opportunities. So sexual harassment claims can be pursued under Title IX, violence against women, pregnancy discrimination, things like that. But because educational institutions receive federal funding, the Title IX is also used in the sporting context. And that's why when Erica and I were looking at ways to enforce laws against the school that would allow women to have sporting opportunities. And softball at the time, in the early 1990s, was one of the most popular sports in the U.S. for women to play. And to not have a team sponsored by the school when there was an established Ivy League in which for it to play really, really bothered us, particularly when there was interest, and a lot of interest on campus for women to be able to play the sport. So we looked at the tool of Title IX, as I mentioned, to allow us to pursue our request for a team to the school in a way that we could get support from the federal government and people who were very familiar with this, with Title IX. And that when the Department of Education investigated and assessed that the school was out of compliance with the act, or out of compliance with Title IX, it was not just one sport. It was 2 varsity sports and several JV sports that they felt the school was not providing adequate opportunities for women in a variety of sporting teams, consistent or commensurate, proportional with the men's opportunities at the school. And so you're saying the impact that it had was that it allowed the school to make the right decision about offering these opportunities for women's sports. So they established not just a women's varsity softball team, but they established a women's varsity volleyball team, which was also the second most popular sport at the time, and several JV opportunities in a variety of sports. And now, fast forward, almost 30 years later, and the softball team, for example, has won several title championships, has a beautiful indoor practice facility along with the men's baseball team, has its own field with dugouts and, stadium seating like the men's team has, and has really found a lot of success there competitively. But going to your point, there are so many life skills and qualities learned through sport that for women to not have those opportunities, then they are really not developing those life skills in ways that are offered for men. Life skills that are transferable to other professions to personal relationships to family dynamics, things like communication, teamwork, getting along with a variety of different personalities and styles of learning and playing and preparing, coordination. I mean, sort of all the physical attributes of the sport, preparation, the competitive instinct, having good sportsmanship and learning how to lose graciously. At least no one wants to lose in sport, but losing graciously and using those losses as tools to improve. I have kids, and when they started playing sports at a very young age, I remember the first time my son played a sport, he won his first game and then got to the car and said, I think I'm done. I don't want to play anymore because I might lose a game. And it was a very good learning opportunity to say that no one wants to lose, but that's a great way to learn what you need to improve on, because it highlights areas that didn't work so well, and that allows for focus in those areas. Those are all great skills that are transferred effectively into the workforce. If you're working on a project and it falls flat, well, what do you need to do to improve? And where do you need to help upskill other team members to provide further support? What do you need to do to improve? How can you communicate better and get the best out of your team and motivate them in ways that are very productive? How do you support people when they're having a bad day or they're not performing as well as they can up to their potential? All of those skills that are used effectively in the workplace can be and are learned in the sporting context.
So would you say then that Title IX has changed the way society views women? It has changed women themselves? And would you say that Title IX has led to a greater acceptance of women's strength, ambition, and leadership?
So I'm not sure how many people are actually aware of Title IX and what it does and how it's employed. So I think
quite a few, more than you'd expect.
Yeah.
In America, not outside. Yes. I mean, a lot of our audience, listeners who are in other countries wouldn't know. But in America, people are very aware, and some people credit the success of women's soccer. Look, football is a religion in the rest of the world, and the American men's team ain't that great.
Right.
But Americans' women's team wins almost non-stop. Spain won recently.
Right.
And of course, it led to a controversy immediately afterwards.
Right.
Exactly. One of the poor players was kissed on the lips by the federation chief, and American women constantly make the argument that Title IX is the secret for the success of American soccer / football, women's football in this country. So people do know about Title IX. But please, let's go back to my question about, has it changed society? Has it changed women?
I think it has incrementally changed society for sure. I don't think it has. It is a framework that allows for better opportunities and access by women to sports and sports opportunities, and requires a level of commitment to women's sports that previously was not provided. So I don't think it has shaped women as much as it's provided a framework for women to be able to be on a more even playing field and develop themselves in sports and be recognized. I have these arguments with my son all the time about, well, women's sports are not, that people don't watch them. If you look at the ratings, men's sports gets better ratings than women. Well, there's a history behind that. I mean, it's not just providing the opportunities for women, but there's a whole network that has been well entrenched around men's sports in terms of media and advertising and promotion, awareness, excitement generated about it. And the education amendments have, 1972, has helped women get a platform for that, but they're playing a huge catch-up game. And that it has provided the platform for them to excel, but it's incrementally changing attitudes about women. And until women in sports, and until those attitudes and opinions of women and their ability to play sports effectively, until those change, which they are in the sport you mentioned, right? There's a platform now, the women are performing extremely well, that generates excitement, but there needs to be more sort of focus and attention, I think, from the media to provide more of a push to support women's sports, more so than there ever has been, in order for there to be similar primetime showing of women's sports, analysis of their abilities, of their strategies, the competitive, and there's a huge catch-up game there. We've done a lot of catching up, but it still needs to be done in a variety of sports. So absolutely, Title IX has changed the landscape and the framework to propel women to exceed and excel in sports, but there's a catch-up game with the media portraying that I think is very important in order to get more attention and similarly endorsements for women's sports that will then have a very comparable effect like it does for the men's sports on viewership.
So let me quote a biologist and a woman, and she plays tennis, and she made the point that, look, I certainly want the opportunity to play sport, but she said to expect that women's sports are going to earn as much is ridiculous, because I don't want to watch women's cricket. She said, my friends, Indian friends, took me to Lord's to watch Indian cricket, and it was so slow. Men's cricket is just more explosive. And she said she enjoys watching men's tennis more. And this is a woman saying. So she said that don't conflate opportunity with outcome. What would you say to her?
I mean, I see her point, but that's applying a men's standard of what you find exciting when you watch to a women's sport. So, for example, in basketball, men regularly dunk the ball. Women's basketball players, some can, but it's not nearly as prevalent. So if the standard is, I want to go and watch a basketball game because I want to see how many dunks there are and how exciting they are, of course women's sports and watching women's basketball is not going to meet that standard. But what about applying a different standard to how you view women's sports? What do you say? And this is why I love watching women's soccer, football, and the rest of the world, more than men's soccer. Because the strategy the women employ, to me, is more interesting to watch. It's a different style of play. There's more of a build-up. You can see the strategy and how they play. Whereas, yes, the men might be faster and they get into more entanglements and, they fall down a lot. There's a lot of dramatics. You have much fewer of that watching the women's soccer. So I think as fans, when you watch it, you shouldn't expect the same standard to be applied or the same type of play. But women's sports can be just as exciting to watch when you're looking for different things that the women excel at and that can do more effectively sometimes than the men.
So that'll need a cultural change, because if sports are based on market principles, then the producer might say, look, I answer to my company, and the company lives quarter by quarter. So if it's not my job to change people's tastes, my job is to cater to people's tastes, whether it's a man or woman producer, they will be out of a job if the ratings fall, as you know. So in a way, then, unless people's tastes change, to expect that to change at the commercial level is almost, impossible. You in many ways, you need society to change, and that may be through legislation, which will of course not be market-based principles, or there's a huge cultural shift and people say, actually I want to watch women's soccer because it's women's football because it is just more interesting and exciting.
Right, and
interesting and strategic. Yeah,
I think you do need a cultural shift, and the question is, how do you make that happen? I think for the company executive, I think the answer is that's a marketing issue, right? If you're marketing the same standard across the board, then you're going to have a discrepancy in viewership that we are experiencing. But why wouldn't you market watching women's sports in a different way? why don't you market, as I mentioned in the example, why don't you market watching women's soccer as super exciting because you can see amazing, through passes, or, they're more, interesting in sort of the dynamic. I mean, there's a way to market it that there builds an excitement. And in that process of marketing, you're making cultural shifts. You're encouraging cultural shifts on how you.
Well, what is the incentive? Because you're living quarter by quarter in the capitalist
model.
This
is the gap I was saying, right? Yeah. This is the gap. I mean, when you have years of men's sports as a advantage, sort of they're ahead of the game, right? If this is like a multi-marathon approach. It's not a sprint. And so the men have had a huge head start. So yes, it's not going to develop. You're not going to make changes in a quarter, but you can start with these larger marketing plans that shift the cultural perspective quarter by quarter incrementally till you're narrowing that gap between viewership. And you have to look at what is exciting about the women's sports that's different. Or, are there areas of comparison that are equally exciting, and you market to those things that are interesting, that will show interest. I mean, there are things that marketing and brand management do to get sustained interest, right? There are, headlines like, in terms of, Cal Ripken, for example, in baseball. They announced how many games he played consecutively for how long, because it was so impressive that he never took a day off. That was never a standard, really, in men's sports. But marketing looked at it and said, that's what makes Cal Ripken so impressive and interesting, and we're going to do this. And then people wanted to watch the Baltimore Orioles all the time to see, is Cal Ripken going to play another game? Is he going to break the record again? That's the type of dynamic that needs to be brought to women's sports and following, so that they can generate that type of interest for certain players, teams, patterns, excellence in play, so that there can be more of a cultural shift, that there is interest in watching women's sports.
Well, you could say in some ways the sport that is doing it best is football, what you call soccer. Every single major club in Europe has a women's team. Barcelona, right. Arsenal, Manchester City, Chelsea, Manchester United, Chelsea, we could go on.
Right.
And they are indeed, to be fair, bringing in players. And Spain has come up. Spain was always a major force in men's football, but now they are a force in women's football as well. England has come up. So you could say that change is already under process. But a lot of women players themselves say that to expect that it'll be the same viewership, is probably unlikely because of the nature of society itself.
I guess I'm a bit more optimistic. I don't think it's going to happen, immediately. And it's not just a cultural shift, I think, in terms of viewership or marketing the teams. It's also in how to view women and the role of women. And you raised this in terms of the Spanish women's soccer team, and that they were so successful. And then immediately afterwards, there was an unfortunate and improper contact with the federation chief for Spain, where he, kissed her inappropriately on the lips. That was for him to think that was appropriate and acceptable and welcomed, means that there's not enough of a cultural shift about how to view women than there should be. So, I mean, it's not just providing the opportunity for women in sports and letting them play. It's also saying, and respecting them as individuals, women who have, the ability to, not just the ability, but the right to say yes or no in whatever context, whether it's playing for a team, welcoming or not welcoming certain advances, or in the workforce, whatever role they want. And we have to shift in our mindset that while we're sensual and sentient beings, and there are relationships between people, that it's not just thrust upon one person or another, or thrust upon women, because we like how they performed. So it's a cultural mind shift to accept women in sports and they're excelling in sports, but also how we view women holistically as, people with minds and abilities to make their own choices and respecting them to do that.
So you've raised a very important issue, and this is where sometimes there's a clash of cultures, because the head of Deoband, one of the great theological seminaries in South Asia, actually in India, and the Taliban followed the Deoband school. He has said that women and men should not study together. He has said that women should not play sports because, of course, that tempts men. No, I mean, he didn't quite say this, but they shouldn't play sports. So in much of the Islamic world, women are not supposed to have the right to play sport, and in many traditional cultures. So how do we, on the one hand, say, okay, we respect all cultures and all religions, and then we say, but no, this is a universal right and we impose on it. Is that the next frontier for women's sports?
I think it is, and I think you use Islam as an example, but there's other religions where it's seen that, Orthodox Judaism has very similar.
But Islam has over 1 billion adherents. Orthodox Jews are very few in number in comparison.
Fair enough. But the point is, it's not unique to one religion.
But they are the biggest.
So the dichotomy of that thinking is
exactly, and they are the most extreme. I mean, look at the Taliban. All right, they've said women can't even go to school. They've followed what the Deobandis have told them, really, and gone above and beyond that. And they've blown up Buddha statues too. So that is the more extreme. Orthodox Jews are not blowing up Buddha statues.
Yes, and what I was going to say is that in Orthodoxy that there is a belief that men and women shouldn't pray together. They shouldn't, educate themselves together. They should be separate. And I think
that's in many religions.
That's
actually.
my point.
The conservative elements. I'm sure. We can find Christian churches with similar beliefs too, where women are not supposed to play sport,
right,
and not to have abortions, by the way.
This podcast is going to all sorts of topics all over the place.
No, I'm just giving an example.
But yes, and then I think the point is that there should be opportunities
so
for
it should
women
be a
to
universal
play
right.
Sport. And not necessarily.
And if you're a Deobandi,
different discussion, I think, about whether men and women there should be, playing sports in the same league. That's a whole nother discussion.
That's not.
But in terms of them keeping separate, I mean, I think that the fact that we have separate leagues for men and women, and that
I was talking more of the
but
right
in terms
to
of just
play
the
sport.
right to play sport. I mean, I think I'm not well versed in that religion to know what it says and why. But I would just say that I think some of the interpretations may be cultural in how it's applied.
The Quran says the witness of one, either one man or two women. It's very much. I was reading it the other day. So let's not lie.
I think but there are also many. There I shouldn't say many, but there are women that you see in the Olympics who are Muslim who are honoring their religion, wearing long sleeves, wearing the hijab, and running races in track and field or other, sports, that they have found a peace.
Via media.
They have found a peace or a medium in which they can honor their religious beliefs and still engage in the sport that they like and that they prefer. And I think that there are, as I mentioned, the qualities that you learn from engaging in sport for personal development, professional development, are just tremendous. That there seems to me that there should be a way to marry whatever your religious beliefs are with the opportunities to engage in sports in the way that you want to do it, to develop yourself and your community.
Final question. What is the next frontier? You mentioned more change in marketing, change in cultural attitudes. My team said, is it, you've mentioned some, is it pay equity? Is it media representation? Is it leadership in sports organizations?
I think all of those. I think it's all of those. I think that but it's also the expansion of opportunities for women in sports, right? There's some sports that don't necessarily get as much recognition as others, maybe dance or gymnastics or synchronized swimming. I mean, we see them in some platforms in the Olympics or other sort of national championships, but we don't have
Friedrich von Hayek would say the market doesn't want it.
And I think this goes back to our other conversation, right? In terms of the market doesn't want it. Does the market know about it? Does the market,
to give a counter to the market, which a lot of people do, is that the market for pornography is always bigger than poetry. So do we teach pornography in schools?
Well, that's a good example, right? Like there's something, and that's good for the marketing aspect, right? Is there some way, some lessons learned for how pornography is promoted, legal pornappornography, we should say on this podcast, right? How it's promoted in a way that we can take lessons.
The point
legal
is
and healthy pornography.
I mean, we would be legal in Saudi Arabia, whatever we do, Lauren. No, the point is a deeper philosophical one, that you cannot have the tyranny of the markets, and some things are important even if, let's say, the market doesn't support them. So
but markets are flexible and markets are malleable, right? And
yes and no.
There has to it has an effect.
Yes and no. The truly great works of art generally do not excite as many people as a Roman circus. That's human nature. We are going, how many people showed up, to watch, say, a fantastic painting, and how many people would show up to watch vaudeville?
But what is the value of one of these paintings versus the ticket price for the circus, right? I think you have to be careful about the measuring sticks we use to determine success. So I don't think that.
No, I'm not even talking about success at all. I'm talking about value. Okay. So a lot of the greatest artists who've ever lived died broke and unknown. I think
that's true, but the value of their paintings now.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter at all, because what I'm saying, the market per se is highly imperfect and will always be. You can never entirely trust the market. Same as you can never trust the state. That is not a broader philosophical point. And so if we are prisoners to market metrics, then we will have to go along with certain injustices. That's a broader philosophical point.
Yes, but I think that philosophical point is it is being recognized more so now. For example, in terms of value of companies, back to your, the media and saying that, how do you promote this? And the company executive that says, I'm looking at my market data for the quarter. There are businesses now that are B Corps because they found the benefit is greater than just the market value and just the bottom line figures, that there has to be corporation or corporations where it is required as part of to give back to the community and have social service and other.
Jury's still out. All the big companies. Let's not digress down that, because all the big companies like Twitter, Facebook are pretty toxic, and none of them is a B Corp. So, and media has been destroyed by the for-profit model. So wherein.
But that goes to your market point. What the market wants and bears is not only metric to look at in terms of the next frontier for women's sports. I think it is looking at these other areas, but not necessarily using the same measuring stick guide that has been historically done for men, because to measure success for women in sports and the opportunities and what the next frontier holds, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same metric as used previously for sports.
So more media representation, more leadership roles in sports organization, and, as you said, very rightly, support for sports that may not necessarily be popular today and may not have the capricious smile of the markets.
Correct, but may be very important to women and
Exactly.
what types of opportunities.
Exactly. All right. On that note, Lauren Greenberg, thank you very much for your time. I know you have to run back to your office. We've kept you long away from your work, and billable hours means this is a huge sacrifice.
This has been wonderful, and I really greatly appreciate you giving me the opportunity, a platform to talk with you about something near and dear to my heart.
Thank you very much. And those of you who've liked this podcast, make sure you subscribe to FO Podcasts, whether you use Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, whatever. And make sure you sign up for our newsletter. Go to fairobserver.com and sign up for our free newsletters. And if you think nonprofit journalism without owners, without advertisers, deserves a shot, then make sure you sign up for our crowdfunding campaign. This is Atul Singh sitting in the National Press Club with Lauren Greenberg saying adieu for now.
Bye, and thank you again.